Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Donald C Stewart and we're here at Broadcasting Scotland, slightly tardy and behind time, but I think as everybody realises right now, as we rush towards Christmas and dealing with all of the crises that are coming up on a daily basis, things do get to pile on top of you. So apologises for being late, but here are the headlines from today. We start with the Ukrainian update, and I can't believe it is day 300 of the illegal Russian war against the Ukrainian people. And from today, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has said the situation in 4 areas of eastern Ukraine, being Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, that Moscow illegally annexed in September was extremely difficult. Russia's illegal annexation of the 4 territories, which together make up 15% of Ukraine, marked the largest forcible takeover of territory in Europe since the Second World War, and was condemned by Kyiv and its Western allies as illegal. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell today condemned Iran's support for Russia in its war in Ukraine and the ongoing repression of opposition in the country of Iran, but said the EU would continue to work with them in restoring the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Ukraine is accelerating efforts to erase the vestiges of Soviet and Russian influence from its public spaces by pulling down monuments and renaming hundreds of streets to honour its own artists, poets, soldiers, independence leaders and others, including heroes of this year's war. China has said Chinese-Russian naval drills beginning on Wednesday aim to further deepen cooperation between the sides whose unofficial anti-Western alliance has gained strength since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Putin was also in Belarus on Monday, where he and the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, hardly mentioning the war raging in nearby Ukraine, conducted a late-night joint news conference. Belarus's defence ministry said it had completed a series of inspections of its armed forces' military preparedness hours ahead of Putin's visit to Minsk. The exiled Belarus opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has warned that the chances of Minsk sending soldiers into Ukraine may increase in coming weeks. Ukraine's Air Force said it shot down 30 out of 35 of the Iranian-made Russian Shahed drones overnight. Russia's defence ministry said its forces had shot down 4 US-made HARM anti-radiation missiles over the Belgorod region, which borders Ukraine. And the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said he believes Russia's war in Ukraine will go on and does not see a prospect for serious peace talks in the immediate future. European Union ministers have agreed a plan to cap the price of gas at €180, ending months of argument over how to handle the cost of soaring energy prices after Russia cut gas supplies to Europe. And the Canadian government has announced plans to seize $26 million in sanctioned assets from the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, with the proceeds from the forfeiture to go towards reconstruction in Ukraine and compensation of victims of the Russian invasion. And from Ukraine, we go to the Scottish Parliament, who are sitting late to vote on Stage 3 amendments to the Gender Recognition (open brackets) Reform (close brackets) bill. It's currently voting on the unusually large number of amendments to this bill, which is being debated at Stage 3 and is expected to finally pass tomorrow after years of consultations and controversy. The GRR bill, as it is known, is supported by the Scottish National Party, Scottish Greens and Labour, although individual MSPs in both the SNP and Labour parties oppose the bill. The Scottish Parliament is expected to sit until 10 o'clock this evening. And in terms of industrial action, today was the second day of nurses' strike action, with ambulance drivers due to strike tomorrow in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Thousands of nurses have gone on strike in those 3 areas of the UK, England, Wales and Northern Ireland as the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak insisted he would not back down in the face of the United Kingdom's most significant wave of industrial action in a generation. From rail journeys to Christmas card deliveries and passport checks at airports, key services right across Britain are being hit by industrial action, which has intensified in the run-up to Christmas. Tuesday's nurses' strike was the second of 2 days of industrial action, the first time they have ever held a nationwide strike, as workers fight to protect their living standards in the face of soaring inflation. This will be followed on Wednesday by a day-long stoppage by ambulance staff. Trade unions have stuck life and limb agreements, which they say will ensure emergencies are properly dealt with. But bosses from England's National Health Service, the NHS, have warned that some patients may be put at risk. Matthew Taylor, the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, which represents healthcare employers, warned people tomorrow with urgent needs will not be attended to. We can't avoid additional risks and additional harm to patients. Workers across the taxpayer-funded sector in the United Kingdom have faced a decade or more of pay restraint as successive Conservative governments have sought to, in their own words, balance the books by repeatedly freezing or capping their wages. With inflation running at 40-year highs, unions say many people are struggling to cope, and the Royal College of Nursing has claimed some members have been forced to use food banks, charity-backed handouts of essential groceries. All four unions involved in the NHS action this week have also expressed concern at the fragile state of the system, which has faced unprecedented pressures through the COVID pandemic and is struggling to tackle the huge backlog of patients waiting for care, which have been exacerbated by the pandemic. NHS staff have been offered a pay rise of at least £1,400 each, which is equivalent to about 4% on average for nurses, but are pushing for a rise that at least keeps pace with the double-digit UK inflation. With average pay across the economy growing at 6% as many employers struggle with labour shortages, NHS bosses have warned that they are losing staff to other sectors such as supermarkets. So far, Rishi Sunak's government has refused even to discuss pay with NHS workers. The Conservative leader has been in office for less than 2 months following the disastrous, short-lived premiership of his predecessor, Liz Truss. And part of their flagship policy in order to help out the most vulnerable in the United Kingdom, news today that the most vulnerable are missing out as a third of UK energy help vouchers have not been redeemed. UK government ministers have been urged to intervene after it emerged that more than a third of vouchers intended to ease the energy bills of people on prepayment meters have not been redeemed. Data released by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy showed that 34% of vouchers have not been cashed in since the scheme launched in October. The Energy Bill Support Scheme was introduced to soften the blow of rising bills this winter. The Energy Price Guarantee cuts bills for people on direct debits, whilst the voucher scheme was designed to help those on prepayment meters. However, more than 1.3 million vouchers remain unredeemed, with many either lost, delayed or unclaimed. The Guardian revealed at the start of December that up to 500,000 of the UK's most vulnerable families have been left without government help since October. In total, fewer than 2.7 million of the more than 4 million time-limited vouchers for £66 sent to households with traditional prepayment meters have been claimed. Consumer champion Martin Lewis joined with which Age UK, Citizens Advice and National Energy Action to write to the Business Secretary Grant Shapps expressing concern over the low redemption rate. He said, "It cannot be right that millions of pounds of government support is going unclaimed while low-income and vulnerable groups are at risk." Jointly, they wrote in an open letter which was published today on Tuesday. They called for the government to regularly publish redemption rates, including the delivery method, investigate why redemption rates are low, raise awareness of the scheme, and consider adapting it when issues are identified. And we go for news that is certainly consistent over the last few months to what may be claimed a blast from the past, as Douglas Alexander has announced that he wants to be Labour's Westminster candidate for East Lothian. The former Cabinet Minister, Douglas Alexander, is understood to be trying to stand again as a Labour MP at the next Westminster election. According to The Guardian, Douglas Alexander, who held 3 cabinet posts under Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, had submitted his application to be the party's candidate in East Lothian. Of course, he dramatically lost his Paisley and Renfrewshire seat to the SNP's now deputy leader in Westminster, Mary Black, at the 2015 election, when Labour was left with only 1 MP in Scotland. Since then, Alexander has been a senior fellow at Harvard University since leaving politics. East Lothian is, of course, Labour's #1 target seat in Scotland, and was held by the party until the SNP landslide in 2015, then briefly won back between 2017 and 2019 by Labour, with Labour insiders describing it as the most easily winnable seat for Labour in Scotland. And going further back into history, we heard news today of a former Nazi camp secretary who has been found guilty of complicity in 10,500 murders. A 97-year-old former secretary at a Nazi concentration camp has been found guilty of complicity in that number of people imprisoned there and being murdered as part of the process in which she was principally engaged, and handed a 2-year suspended sentence. Irmgard Furchner, who has been on trial in the northern German town of Itzehoe for more than a year, spoke to the court on one occasion earlier this month to say that she was sorry for what had happened, but stopped short of admitting her guilt. The start of her trial was delayed in September 2021, when she briefly went on the run. Having failed to turn up at court, she was found by police hours later on the outskirts of Hamburg, after which she was held in custody for 5 days and fitted with an electronic wrist tag. Furchner had worked at the Stutthof camp between 1943 and 1945 as a secretary to Camp Commandant Paul Werner Hopp when she was 18 and 19. She was tried in a juvenile court owing to her age at the time the crimes were committed. And she is the first civilian woman in Germany to have been held responsible for crimes committed in a Nazi concentration camp. The judge, Dominique Gross, said the trial would be one of the worldwide last criminal trials related to crimes of the Nazi era, and took the unusual step of allowing the proceedings to be recorded for historical purposes. The trial, which took place over 40 days of sessions of about 2 hours duration due to the accused's advanced age, heard from 30 survivors and relatives of prisoners of Stutthof from the United States, from France, Austria, and from the Baltic states. It also heard from historical experts who gave details of the daily life at Stutthof and the role Furchner played in assisting the bureaucratic processing of prisoners, as well as information about the treatment of prisoners, including torture methods and the procedures involved in the systematic murder of thousands of them, to which they say she had been privy. Many prisoners were left to starve and freeze in the open air. An estimated 63,000 to 65,000 people, about 28,000 of whom were Jewish, were murdered at Stutthof, mostly in gas chambers, some by a shot in the back of the neck, for which the prison had a specially built facility. During the trial, court officials, including the judge, visited the preserved site of Stutthof near Gdansk in Poland, in what was then territory that had been annexed by the Reich by Germany. There they saw for themselves the proximity of Furchner's desk and the office she shared with other secretaries to the workings of the camp's death machinery, including gas chambers, a crematorium, and a gallows. They concluded that the view she had from her window, her walk to and from the office, along with the orders she was instructed to process on her typewriter and via telephone, were enough for her to have had sufficient insight into and have therefore actively participated in what was going on in the camp. And from Europe over to America, with the US House of Representatives to decide whether to release details of Donald Trump's tax returns. In Congress today, a Democratic-led US House committee is due to decide whether to release details of his tax returns after a years-long court fight and just 2 weeks before their party surrenders power to the Republicans. The House Ways and Means Committee is due to examine from behind closed doors at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, the day after the House investigation of the January 6th assault on the Capitol by Trump supporters urged the Justice Department to prosecute the Republican for his role in sparking the riot. Trump, unlike previous presidential candidates, refused to make his tax returns public as he sought to keep secret the details of his wealth and the activities of his real estate company, the Trump Organization, and he fought Democrats' efforts to get access to them. Candidates are not required by law to release their tax returns, but previous presidential hopefuls of both Republican and Democratic parties have voluntarily done so for several decades. Trump's tax returns are still subject to confidentiality restrictions, but Democrats who control the committee could vote to make some details public. Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee have said they need to see those records to assess whether the Internal Revenue Service is properly auditing presidential tax returns and to gauge whether new legislation is needed. The committee's chairman, Representative Richard Neal, has not said whether he supports making them public. They have little time to act as Republicans are due to take control of the committee along with the full House this coming January. Release of any financial details could lead to more unwelcome scrutiny for Trump as he seeks the Republican nomination to run for the White House again in 2024. And from Donald Trump, we go off to Afghanistan, as worrying news today that the Taliban have banned Afghan women from university education. Afghan's Taliban rulers have ordered an indefinite ban on university education for the country's women, the Ministry of Higher Education said in a letter issued to all government and private universities. It said, "You are all informed to implement the mentioned order of suspending education of females until further notice," in a letter signed by the Minister for Higher Education, Nida Mohammed Nadim. The ministry's spokesperson, Zayullah Hashimi, who tweeted the letter, confirmed the order in a text message to Agence France-Presse. The ban on higher education comes less than 3 months after thousands of girls and women sat university entrance exams right across the country, with many aspiring to choose engineering and medicine as future careers. After the takeover of Afghanistan by the hardline Islamists in August last year, universities were forced to implement new rules, including gender-segregated classrooms and entrances, and women were only permitted to be taught by female professors or old men. Most Afghan teenage girls have already been banned from secondary school education, severely limiting university intake. The Taliban adhere to a distorted version of Islam, while the movement's supreme leader, Hibatullah Akhundzadeh, and his inner circle of Afghan clerics oppose to modern education, particularly for girls and for women. But they are at odds with many officials in Kabul and some of their rank and file who had hoped girls would be allowed to continue learning after the takeover. Women have been pushed out of many government jobs or are being paid a slashed salary to stay at home. They are also barred from travelling without a male relative and must cover up outside the home, ideally with a burqa. In November, they were prohibited from going to parks, going to fun fairs, gyms, and also to public baths. In a cruel U-turn, the Taliban in March blocked girls from returning to secondary schools on the morning they were supposed to reopen. And since the ban, many teenage girls have been married off early, often to much older men of their father's choice. The international community has made the right to education for all women a sticking point in negotiations over aid and recognition of the Taliban regime. And back home, the Scottish Government budget has allocated £4.85 billion to education and skills. This is to cover a range of measures to help children, parents and carers with costs around school, which have been set out in the Scottish Government's budget. These include an expansion of free school meals in primary schools, holiday food provision, and investment to ensure that the school clothing grant national minimum of £120 for primary pupils and £150 for secondary pupils. The spending plans for 2023-24 allocates £4.85 billion of funding across the education and skills portfolio, including measures to address the cost of living crisis. New investment will see free school meals expanded to primary 6 and primary 7 pupils in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment, the next step in Scottish Government plans to deliver universal free school meals in primary schools. It also includes £22 million of continued support to provide meals during the school holidays to children who need them most, along with £200 million for the Scottish Attainment Challenge. In addition, the budget allocates £50 million of funding to continue to support the Whole Family Wellbeing Programme of Activity, a key pillar of the promise to support families to thrive. Education Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville commented, "I am committed to improving the life chances of all Scotland's children, young people and learners. The measures set out in these spending plans are driven by our ambition to enable everybody to reach their full potential. We know the toll that the cost of living crisis has taken on families and households across Scotland, and investment is being made in a range of important measures which will help mitigate the impact of this. The expansion of free school meals in primary schools continues, providing a benefit in kind of around £400 per child for families, while the ongoing investment in the school clothing grant and access to digital devices will help those who need it most. Our ongoing commitment to free university tuition means that, unlike elsewhere in the UK, Scottish domiciled students do not incur a debt of up to £27,750, and average student loan debt in Scotland remains the lowest in the UK. Staying on education, a survey today has found that parents back-funded early learning and childcare. A vast majority of parents using Scottish Government-funded early learning and childcare are satisfied with its quality, according to new research. In an independent survey with more than 8,000 respondents, 97% of parents and carers with a 3 to 5 year old said they had accessed funded places in early learning and childcare since August 2021, and of those, a staggering 97% were satisfied with the quality of provision. A total of 88% of those with a 3 to 5 year old were satisfied that they could use their funded early learning and childcare hours in a way that met their own family's needs. The main reason parents and carers said they used the early learning childcare were to benefit their child's development, confidence, independence, and learning. Survey respondents also valued the opportunities that funded ELC gave them to work, look for employment, or to undertake education and training for themselves. Others reported that it alleviated stress and meant they had more time for themselves and their families. Across Scotland, all 3 and 4 year olds and 2 year olds who need it, most can access up to 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare per annum. If families paid for the 1,140 hours themselves, it would cost them around £5,000 per eligible child per year. In 2023-24, the Scottish Government will invest around £1 billion through local government in funding for those 1,140 hours on offer. Children's Minister Claire Haughey said, "I am really encouraged to see a high level of satisfaction among parents with the quality of the funded early learning and childcare that they have received." Scotland is the only part of the UK where all 3 and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds can access up to 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare per annum. As this independent survey demonstrates, funded high-quality ELC brings a range of benefits to families, including helping children's educational development and supporting parents' ability to work and find employment. Also staying with Scottish Government, the payments to farmers have been made early to mitigate the cost of living crisis by the Scottish Government, and a total of £964 million has been allocated to the Rural Affairs and Islands portfolio in the Scottish budget. More than £620 million will provide ongoing agricultural support, ensuring stability to farmers, crofters and land managers in 2023-24. It comes as the first tranche of the Less Favoured Area Support Scheme payments are set to arrive in bank accounts ahead of schedule and before Christmas. The National Test Programme, which is helping farmers and crofters achieve statutory emission targets, will see Year 2 funded with £20 million. Less Favoured Area Support Scheme payments are being made a month ahead of previous years and total £55.8 million. Rural Affairs Secretary Mary Gougen said, "Our farmers and crofters are vital to the Scotland's economy, and the Scottish Budget 2023-24 reflects that. Despite the difficult financial circumstances we, like governments all over the world, are faced with, the Scottish Government has sought to protect financial support for our farmers to provide cash flow certainty amid these extremely challenging times. In addition, £405.5 million of basic payment scheme and greening payments have been made already to 17,001 farmers and crofters." Within the latest budget, those working the land in the most remote and fragile areas will continue to receive support through the Less Favoured Area Scheme, which has been allocated £65 million. Our ambition to make Scotland a global leader in sustainable and regenerative agriculture is underlined by £44 million worth of funding. And staying still with the Scottish Government, the Regional Economic Policy Review was published today. It includes a series of recommendations published to further develop regional economies and help deliver Scotland's economic transformation. The Regional Economic Policy Review, carried out by an expert advisory group, proposes further supporting the 8 regional economic partnerships, the REPs, which bring together local government, the private sector, education and skills providers, enterprise and skills agencies and the third sector to accelerate growth at regional and at national levels. It suggests a more entrepreneurial approach to working with the private sector and also recommends the following: allowing more decision making at a regional level on strategic priorities and how to deliver them, meaning work can be done at a greater pace. Establishing further regional intelligence hubs to develop regional expertise and analysis to assist decision making and reducing the need for paid consultants. Reducing duplication and simplifying funding sources, including from the UK and Scottish governments, to enable more strategic use of investment. Increasing joint working with the Scottish Government to help reps implement their economic strategies. Business Minister Ivan McKee from the Scottish Government said regional economic partnerships bring disparate voices together to address important issues such as how to create high-value jobs in areas of opportunity like renewable energy and the space industry. We will now work with our partners to implement these findings and ensure the regions play a central role in the Scottish Government's national strategy for economic transformation. Well, that's it for this evening. A full rundown of the news, including what has been important with the Scottish budget here and what has been happening abroad, and most importantly, what has been happening, to keep it very much in our mind, in Ukraine. So I just want to remind you before I disappear that at Broadcasting Scotland here, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So on behalf of all of us here, a genuine thank you to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments. Thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. And of course, if you have followed us, especially on Twitter, where there are thousands of followers there, please take a moment to spread the word and send our programmes out to others who may not already have heard of us, so that by building that kind of democratic base, we might be able to have more independent programmes produced within the confines and the boundaries of Scotland in order to ensure a better media and a service for everybody who's watching. But in the meantime, from me, Donald C. Stewart, here at Broadcasting Scotland, it's good night and thank you for watching.